Why was everyone laughing when she stepped out of the truck? The armored doors groaned open, and for a moment the recruits on the gravel parade ground squinted against the pale Eastern European sky. They expected someone else. They expected a towering veteran and weathered, a voice like steel scraping stone. They expected a man. Instead, she came. A woman, slight in stature, rifle case gripped in one hand, boots quiet on the frosted earth. Her name was. No introduction carried with her, no aura of bravado, just a calm presence and a silence that unnerved more than it reassured. Her hair was tied neatly beneath her cap, her face unpainted by expression, her gray fatigues pressed but weathered from travel. She paused only long enough to take in the camp before stepping onto the gravel with quiet certainty. The reaction was immediate. A ripple of murmurs swept through the formation. One recruit muttered, shaking his head, this is who they sent us." Another chuckled openly, the kind of laughter born of discomfort more than amusement. A third leaned on his rifle and smirked. "She's supposed to teach us sniping." The sound grew until it was a static of mockery. They were young, proud, and untested. She was, to them, a misprint in the script. Said nothing. She walked toward the center of the field and lowered the rifle case with deliberate calm. The metal locks clicked as she opened it. Piece by piece, the weapon came together in her hands. Not a show of speed, not a demonstration of flair, but precise, quiet motion as though the rest of the world had been muted. She was unshaken, even by the weight of their eyes. The major in charge cleared his throat. He sensed the tension, the disbelief. His voice cracked against the morning air with forced authority. "This is advisor. You will treat her instruction as you would treat mine. Today, she leads the drills." The order did little to quiet them. Half-suppressed grins spread across faces. Disbelief clung to them like frost. They were not convinced. Stood the rifle complete, dull metal catching the clouded light. Her gaze swept across the crowd, slow, deliberate, unflinching. When she spoke, her voice was steady, without rise or fall. "First lesson is concealment. Find me." That was all. No explanation, no speech. She turned and walked toward the tree line, vanishing into the thickets without a backward glance. For a beat, the recruits remained still, as though waiting for someone to call it a joke. But the major gave the signal, and 15 men spread into the woods, radios buzzing, rifles slung. At first it felt like a game. Boots crushed frost and leaves, laughter still lingering. They whispered through radios, confident they would expose her quickly. They checked hollows, shoved branches aside, scanned behind fallen logs. A drone operator reported back in irritation. "Thermals clear. No sign." The laughter began to fade. Minutes stretched into half an hour. The woods answered their noise with silence. And then it came. A sharp crack split the air. A paint round burst across the chest of the point man. He froze, disbelieving, raising his hands as though surrendering. Another crack. Another vest marked red. Panic broke their line. Rifles spun wildly toward shadows, but there was nothing, only trees and wind. One after another, shots rang out, each precise, each final. Paint bursts on vests, men shouting, radios filling with confusion. Within minutes, half the squad was marked out. When she finally rose, it was less than 40 meters from their position. Mud streaked her cheeks, branches tangled in her uniform. She had been there all along, lying in the forest floor, patient as stone. She cradled her rifle against her chest and walked back without flourish. "If you cannot see what hunts you," she said quietly, her breath steady, her eyes unreadable, "you are already finished." The words sank heavier than reprimands. The recruits returned to camp restless, shaken. Some whispered excuses, luck, tricks, unfair advantage. She did not respond. She simply gestured toward the firing range. Now the second lesson. Steel targets lay scattered across the valley, near, far, moving, hidden. Some at 200 meters, some at 600. One barely visible at 1,500, swaying faintly in the wind. The recruits crossed their arms, still waiting, still certain they would see her stumble. She loaded 5 rounds, her stance steady. She closed her eyes for a moment as though emptying herself. Then she raised the rifle. The first shot cracked, target at 200 meters dropped. Second, a steel plate hidden behind brush rang out. Third, 600 meters clean. Fourth, 800, another strike. The recruits shifted uneasily. 4 perfect shots, but the last was different. The farthest plate, wind curling down the valley, distance demanding perfection. A miss here would undo everything. She adjusted the scope, calculated wind, bullet weight, air, seconds drained, breath slowed. The recruits leaned forward, waiting for failure. She exhaled, the trigger broke. A single crack rolled across the range. The far plate shuddered, toppled into the dirt. Silence. Even the drone camera confirmed it, a perfect strike. She lowered the rifle with casual indifference as though it had been inevitable. The major's binoculars lowered slowly. His jaw tightened, words murmured under his breath. She isn't ordinary, she's something we've never seen. The recruits stood frozen, unsettled. They realized in that moment, had this been war, none of them would have survived her. That night the camp was quiet. No laughter, no mocking whispers, but doubt lingered, pride still clung to them. They wanted to believe it was still luck, still trickery, said nothing. She ate in silence, eyes down, rifle case beside her. The silence was heavier than words. By morning she called them again to the edge of the forest, her expression unchanged, her tone calm. 1 against many, 15 against 1. If you tag me, I lose. If I tag you, you're out. They stared at her. The odds were absurd, yet no one dared refuse. She disappeared into the woods. 10 minutes later, the whistle blew. The hunt began. The recruits spread, radios whispering, drones buzzing, squads fanning across the ridges. They were certain this time, certainty that numbers, equipment, and pride would shield them. But moved differently. She pressed into the earth, mud streaking her face, scarf pulled tight against her breath. Every movement deliberate, every pause stretched into silence. The first squad reached a ridge, drone circling overhead. They were convinced they had her, but she lay submerged in a shallow creek, water numbing her skin, rifle steady. The drone passed overhead once, twice. Its operator frowned, certain he'd seen movement. Then she fired. 3 shots, 3 vests marked. Panic followed. She vanished back into the forest before they could react. Confusion spread across radios. Voices overlapped, she's behind us. Negative, she's ahead. Orders drowned in noise. The major's voice cut through, stay disciplined, hunt her down. But she was already circling. Another squad spotted a white scrap of cloth against bark. They raised weapons, opened fire in unison, tearing it to shreds. The mistake was fatal. From their flank came 3 sharp cracks. Vests lit red. A trap perfectly set. By midday, half were eliminated. Sweat dripped down collars. Nerves frayed. The forest grew quiet, too quiet. Every twig, every breath, every sound felt dangerous. Thrived in silence. She was patient. She crawled through undergrowth, waited for squads to expose themselves. When 2 recruits crouched behind a rock, radios pressed to their ears, she exhaled and fired twice. Both gone. The survivors clumped together now, whispering, their pride breaking into fear. One muttered, she can't hit us all if we stay close. Another shook his head. She doesn't miss. 1 shot, one of us drops. Hours dragged. The sun dipped, shadows lengthened. Waited, always waiting. A squad of 3 stumbled into a clearing. A branch snapped behind them. They spun, firing bursts into brush, smoke and noise rising. But the sound had come from a stone she had thrown minutes before. From the opposite side, 3 cracks, 3 vests lit red. Now only 4 remained. Exhaustion gnawed at them, pride barely holding them upright. They set an ambush by a stream, rifles trained. They told themselves they would not fail this time. Circled high ground, she lay prone, adjusted for wind. The recruits waited below, rifles tight, breaths fast. She steadied, finger tightening. 1 heartbeat, then another, Then she fired. One fell. The others spun, shouting, firing wildly. Another dropped. Two left, rushing toward her ridge, desperate, her rifle emptied. She ejected the magazine, hands swift, but seconds stretched. If she fumbled, she would lose. The final recruit reached the ridge, raising his rifle. He had her in his sights. Her magazine slammed in, the chamber clicked, and she fired. His vest lit red. He froze, stunned, staring at her through his scope. 6 hours, 15 recruits, not one touched her. She walked back into camp last, mud streaking her uniform, scarf damp, rifle balanced casually, her voice calm. If this were real, none of you would be standing. The silence that followed was heavier than defeat. Why did the camp grow quiet after she proved them all wrong? It wasn't silence born of discipline. It was something heavier, a stillness that clung to the gravel paths, the barracks, even the mess hall. Recruits who once laughed now kept their voices low when she passed. Some avoided her gaze entirely, others watched her with an unease they couldn't explain. She had done nothing to them except reveal what they hadn't wanted to believe, that she was better, faster, more patient, more dangerous than all of them combined. But pride is a stubborn weight. Even when broken, it lingers. Around fire barrels at night, the whispers began again, different in tone but no less sharp. She's lucky. She cheats. She hides behind tricks. They clung to explanations because the truth was too heavy. They had been humbled. Never corrected them. Never raised her voice. She walked the camp with quiet steps, her rifle case in one hand, scarf loose against her neck. She spoke only when necessary. The silence made them uncomfortable, because silence, when wielded by someone certain of their own strength, becomes its own weapon. On the 7th morning after her 1-against-15 hunt, routine cracked. The day began as it always did, reveille at dawn, boots lacing, rifles slung across shoulders, drills beginning in the half-light of frost. But the air was restless, charged, as though the pines themselves carried rumors. Something was coming. By noon it arrived. The major summoned to the command tent. Inside, the map table was littered with knives pinning down laminated sheets, red markers strung along the northern tree line. The senior officers looked uneasy, voices low, shoulders tight. The major's words carried weight. Unidentified armed group in the buffer, could be scouts, could be contractors. Either way, doctrine treats it as live. He slid a folder across the table toward her. You lead a small element, observe, classify, and if engagement is necessary, neutralize. She studied the map without speaking. Her finger traced the creek bends, the timber breaks, the vantage ridges. She circled 3 positions with a pencil, then closed the folder. We step at 2100. I'll take 6. Her tone was even, certain, almost too calm for the stakes. The major exhaled, a breath of both relief and unease. He nodded. Orders were given. Dusk bled out of the pines as the convoy rolled dark. No headlights, only narrow blackout slits glowing faint red on dashboards. In the rear truck, the 6 recruits chosen for the mission sat silent. Their helmets knocked the canvas roof whenever the wheels struck ruts. None spoke. None dared. They dismounted short of the last logging road. Radios to whisper mode. Lights taped over. Optics checked and rechecked. Overhead, a quadcopter hummed, its camera iris glowing faint against the night. Raised her fist. The line froze. She listened, not with ears but with her whole body. The way cold air carried sound. The way branches whispered echoes back. The forest was alive with small noises, but among them one stood out. A pinprick of glare across the creek, glass catching moonlight. Glass, she breathed. Before the major could speak, she was prone. Rifle settled, crosshairs pinned to that faint shimmer. One squeeze, one controlled exhale. A shot broke the silence like a heartbeat. Across the water, a silhouette dropped into ferns. The recruit stiffened. This was no longer training. The scenario had a pulse. The valley answered. Reports cracked from both flanks. Muzzle flashes stuttered behind burlap blinds. AI targets programmed to mimic men bounded between trees with deceptive speed. This was no drill. It was chaos by design. Slid down the bank, mud swallowing her elbows. Left blind 30 meters, she murmured to the nearest pair. Hold your fire unless you see muzzle, I'll clean it. Her calm steadied their shaking hands. She dialed her scope, adjusted for incline, and cut the blind mid-flash. The mannequin folded, speakers hissing into silence. A recruit flinched, then laughed nervously, swallowing it whole when she glanced his way. Two targets moved together, bounding like trained partners. She waited, patience again. When their paths crossed behind the same slab of granite, she sent one round that punched through one helmet, fragmented, and rattled the second. Both sensors lit red. The recruits whispered, all cracking through their fear, 3 down. But wasn't counting bodies. She was counting wind, watching trees lean, listening to the breath of the valley. A burst chewed bark near the major's shoulder, showering splinters. He ducked instinctively, eyes wide, searching for her, pointed with 2 fingers. The recruits peeled to cover like she had taught them. For the first time, they moved like a unit. Another mannequin broke from timber, sprinting in erratic zigzags. It wore a blue panel across its chest, a civilian. A miss here would tag a friendly kill and end the mission. Tracked its stuttered gait. She exhaled, anchored her reticle, fired. The mannequin folded without a touch of blue. No one cheered. No one dared. They simply stood taller behind their trees. The lesson had landed. But the valley wasn't done. Another strobe flickered from the right, teasing through smoke. 2 recruits aimed but raised her palm. "Don't trade on a ghost," she whispered. She felt for the true source, the heat that fog betrayed, the rhythm of fake muzzle reports. She waited until it revealed itself, then cut it clean. 5 down. The 6th crawled low along the creek bed, helmet crown breaking the horizon line. She corrected her scope, dialed wind, fired. Dust and sensor plastic bloomed together. 6. The last was cruel, programmed for a charge. It burst from brush at an oblique angle, blank round spitting fire. One recruit stumbled, glove torn, sliding in mud. The mannequin pivoted toward the noise, sprinting. Bolt locked empty. She reloaded on instinct, hands muscle memory, heart steady. The mannequin lunged closer. She snapped the scope, found the crown, the only legal shot, and fired. The target pitched forward, sensor flaring. The forest exhaled. Silence reclaimed the valley. "Status?" she asked, eyes still in the scope. The major blinked, remembered to breathe. "All green, no friendlies tagged." 7 hostiles down. The recruits broke contact by the book, bounding in pairs, spacing disciplined. Back on the logging road, the truck swallowed them again. The engine hummed polite against the night. In the command tent, reports were filed with clip precision. No jokes, no boasting, just words on paper describing what they had seen but could not explain. The officers lingered. One colonel tapped his pen against the map, murmuring, 6 rounds, 7 kills. Another shook his head, fragmented the double, threaded the runner with blue, cleared the crown under a charge. His voice dropped. "She isn't simply here to teach." The major glanced at the tent flap where her silhouette had already dissolved into night. His voice was low, uneasy, almost reverent. "She's the one you send when you can't afford a second shot." No one argued. The generator ticked, moths tapped glass, frost crept quietly over gravel outside. And the recruits, though they tried to sleep, found themselves staring at the dark, wondering how anyone could move so quiet, so sure, and yet so unseen. The legend had already begun. Why did the recruits start to avoid her shadow? It wasn't because she ordered them to. She rarely spoke at all. It was because her silence seemed to hang in the air, following them through drills, pressing down on every careless mistake. They had mocked her once. Now when she walked into the mess hall, the chatter dimmed. Forks clinked softer against plates. Some straightened their backs instinctively. Others lowered their eyes. never sought their respect, and perhaps that was why it grew. She carried herself with a stillness that unsettled them, but it also forced them to look inward. Every time she demonstrated a skill, it was not just about angles, distances, or breathing patterns. It was about patience. It was about the willingness to wait in silence until the world moved first. But soldiers are young and youth resists reverence. Pride gnawed at them. Around fire barrels in the cold night, whispers sparked again. She's trained differently. She hides behind tricks. She's not one of us. Yet even as they spoke, their voices dropped when shadows moved near the tree line. Because part of them feared she was listening. Part of them feared she was already watching. The truth was worse. She didn't care what they said. She was not here for approval. She was here for the shot, for the discipline of waiting, for the lesson none of them wanted to learn, that the enemy does not care about pride. The enemy does not care about ego. The enemy only cares who is still standing at the end. The tension grew thicker when the major announced the next trial. The hunt, he called it. This time it would not be one squad against her. It would be all of them. 15 again, but with new rules. The exercise would last until dusk. If they touched her even once, she would lose. If she marked them, they were out. It was absurdly uneven. They believed their chances had finally come. But belief is fragile. She walked to the forest edge again, scarf drawn tight, rifle slung. She gave them only a single sentence. If this were real, hesitation would already have killed you. Then she vanished into the woods. Minutes later, the whistle shrieked. The hunt began. They split into squads, radio chatter buzzing in clipped tones. Drones buzzed overhead, heat signatures flickering across screens. Boots spread out across ridges, rifles raised, eager to flush her out. They believed numbers would save them. But numbers don't matter when patience becomes a weapon. Lay pressed into the mud, water from a shallow creek numbing her arms. Her scarf muffled her breath. The rifle balanced steady across her elbows. A drone circled above, its infrared gaze sweeping the forest. Twice it passed overhead. The operator frowned at static on the screen. Then the first shot cracked. The squad leader's vest lit red. He staggered, muttering disbelief. Another shot, another vest, a third. In less than 2 minutes, 3 were gone. Her body melted back into the water, disappearing before their rifles found her. The radios erupted. She's behind us. Negative, she's east, I saw movement. Stay disciplined, hunt her down. The major's voice tried to cut through, but confusion feeds on fear. Another squad spotted a scrap of white cloth against bark. They grinned, raising rifles. They opened fire, bullets shredding it to pieces, but the cloth was bait. From the flank, 3 sharp cracks. 3 more vests lit red. The squad froze, realizing too late that they had been outplayed before they even saw her. By midday, half were gone. Sweat dampened collars. Fatigue pressed on nerves. They clumped together in small groups now, whispering their doubts. One muttered, "She can't hit us all if we stay close." Another shook his head, eyes wide. "She doesn't miss. One shot, one of us drops." And they were right. She moved with the patience of earth itself. Crawling through undergrowth, she waited for footsteps, for shallow breaths, for nervous fingers fidgeting on triggers. She let their impatience expose them. 2 recruits crouched behind a rock, radios pressed to ears. She steadied her rifle, exhaled, and fired twice. 2 more gone. Now only 7 remained. The forest felt smaller. Every twig snap jolted them. Every gust of wind became a threat. They spoke less now, realizing every sound carried to her. Their pride had shattered. What remained was survival. Hours dragged into late afternoon. Shadows lengthened. They stumbled into a clearing, nerves stretched thin. A branch cracked behind them. They spun, rifles firing into brush. Smoke, shredded leaves, noise, but the sound had been a stone she had thrown minutes earlier. From the opposite side of the clearing, her rifle cracked 3 times. 3 more vests lit red. Now 4 remained. Exhaustion gnawed at them, pride barely keeping them upright. They huddled by a stream, rifles fixed on likely approaches, setting an ambush. Circled wide found high ground. She lay prone on a ridge, adjusting her scope. The wind tugged. The distance teased. If she miscalculated even slightly, the round would miss, and 4 desperate men would converge on her. She steadied her breath, one heartbeat, then another. She fired. One dropped. The others spun, shouting, unleashing bursts into trees. She shifted, fired again. Another fell. The last 2 rushed uphill, scrambling toward her ridge. Her rifle clicked empty, the chamber dry. Seconds stretched, long enough to kill her if she faltered. The first crested the ridge, rifle leveled, breath ragged. He had her in his sights. Her hands moved without thought. Magazine slammed in, bolt snapped forward, trigger broke. His vest lit red. He froze, staring at her through his scope, stunned. The final recruit stumbled at the base of the ridge. Rifle swung, round chambered, scope locked. A final crack, his vest glowed. And it was over. 6 hours, 15 recruits, not one touched her. She walked back into camp last. Mud streaked her uniform, scarf damp, rifle balanced casually across her chest. Her words were calm, almost gentle. If this were real, none of you would be standing. The silence that followed was deeper than defeat. That night no one spoke by the fire. No one whispered mockery. Instead, there were questions unspoken. Who was she really? How did she move like that? How could anyone be so still, so precise, so untouchable? Whispers traveled fast, faster than truth, and whispers have a way of changing shape as they spread. By the next morning, a name had been born. They didn't call her anymore. They called her the White Phantom. Why did the officers stop calling her advisor and start watching her like she was something else? It didn't happen all at once. Legends never arrive fully formed. They creep in, unnoticed, until suddenly they stand taller than the truth. At Black Ridge, her presence became a shadow that lingered over everything. Recruits who once mocked her now moved sharper, quieter, almost afraid of being noticed. They trained longer, pushed harder, not because she demanded it. She never raised her voice, never punished them with laps or push-ups. But her silence was heavier than any order. They knew if she was watching, failure would not just be seen, it would be remembered. Around campfires, stories began to twist. Some swore she had vanished in front of 15 men, dissolving into snow. Others claimed her rifle never missed, not once, even at impossible distances. Recruits who hadn't even trained under her yet whispered questions as soon as they arrived. Is she real? Did she truly slip through the trees without a sound? Did she really drop all 15 in one day? The veterans smirked, letting rumor do its work. None it. She ignored the whispers, the name, the myth, White Phantom. She focused only on drills, on scenarios, on shaping patience into a blade. But the myth grew whether she fed it or not. Because soldiers need stories, especially stories of someone untouchable, and every myth begins with a seed of truth. The truth was this: she was not untouchable, she bled, she broke, she simply refused to stop. It showed the morning the final trial began. The major gathered them at dawn, his voice carried across frost and gravel. This will be your last exercise under her supervision. The valley range is seeded with moving dummies, smoke canisters, timed detonations. You will enter as a unit. You will adapt. You will endure. The recruits nodded stiffly, eyes drawn to her. She stood among them, scarf drawn, rifle slung. For once, she was not the ghost in the shadows. She would walk into the chaos beside them. The whistle shrieked. Smoke erupted across the valley, rolling in heavy sheets. Vision cut to meters. Figures darted in and out, AI silhouettes sprinting, ducking, weaving like men. Muzzle strobes flashed from hidden blinds. The air filled with noise and fire. Moved forward without hesitation. One shot dropped a dummy sprinting uphill. Another cracked against a chest plate hidden behind barricade steel. Each shot was final, each hit exact. The recruits tried to keep pace, but chaos is hungry. One was tagged, then another. Smoke swallowed their confidence. They shouted into radios, their voices thin. And then the ground itself betrayed them. A charge detonated Near's position, a flash, a roar of dirt and pain. She staggered, thrown against the slope. A round cracked the edge of her helmet, fragments slicing across her cheek. Blood streaked her face. From the stands, the recruits gasped. For the first time, they saw her broken. The white phantom on the ground, blood where there should have been silence. Seconds stretched, smoke thinned. And then she rose. Her cheek red, scarf torn, eyes sharp as ever. She wiped the blood with the back of her glove, lifted her rifle and walked forward. Pain followed her, she didn't deny it. Her chest rose heavier, her movements slower, but she did not stop. 3 targets remained. They moved erratically, fast, weaving in smoke. She steadied, exhaled through pain, fired. One fell. She shifted, blood dripping into her eye. Another dropped. The last darted through haze, nearly lost in blur. She tracked its rhythm, the sway of its stride, and fired. The target collapsed. The whistle cut, silence fell. The range was quiet, save for smoke drifting like ghosts. The recruits stared, stunned. They had expected to see limits. They had expected to glimpse her humanity at last, and they had, but not in the way they hoped. She bled, she hurt, she endured, and even broken, she did not miss. The major lowered his binoculars. His voice was soft, caught in his throat. She doesn't stop, not for fear, not for blood. Her voice, when it came, was steady, though every word carried the weight of pain. Pain is background. Noise is background. What matters is the shot that decides who walks away. The lesson carved deep, heavier than the smoke still hanging in the valley. They did not cheer. They did not smile. They simply nodded quietly, each man knowing they had been shown something rare. That evening, camp was hushed. Boots echoed between barracks. No laughter, no arguments. She vanished into her quarters, closed the door, and left only silence behind her. Days later, she was gone. No announcement, no ceremony. Her bunk stripped bare, her rifle case missing. Only a folded white scarf remained at the foot of her bed. No one touched it. Weeks passed, then months, but the name did not leave. The phantom lingered. Around campfires, recruits carried her story like a weapon. They spoke of the woman who had turned drills into nightmares, who had vanished into mud and shadows, who had bled and still struck true. Some swore she was still out there, unseen, working in places no file could confirm. Others believed she had gone back to the forests of her homeland, content to remain a ghost. But whenever snow fell on the training grounds, recruits whispered they felt eyes on them. A presence watching, waiting, testing. And that was how legends endure. Not in files, not in medals, but in whispers that outlive the truth. She had once been mocked when she arrived. Now they called her something else. The White Phantom. Why do soldiers tell stories even when they don't know if they're true? Because war feeds on memory, and memory bends. At Black Ridge, the myth of did not die when she left. It grew. It slipped past the camp's wire, carried in whispers, in barrack songs, in the half-truths of recruits who needed to believe they had seen something extraordinary. They had. But extraordinary and myth are not the same. One begins with blood, patience, and discipline. The other grows in the telling. New arrivals asked questions before they even unpacked their kits. Is she real? Did she really vanish in front of 15? Was her rifle white like the snow? The veterans never answered straight. They smirked, shrugged, let silence speak. It was easier that way. Let the legend do its own work. In nearby towns, bartenders heard the same name again and again. White Phantom. A woman who could melt into frost, who could fire once and decide the fate of a battle. Farmers on the northern ridges swore they saw her silhouette on winter nights, rifle balanced across her shoulder, vanishing into tree-lined fog. None of it could be confirmed. None of it needed to be. Because the truth was already larger than life. never asked for it. She didn't care for stories. She had always been more comfortable in silence than in glory. But she had left behind something powerful, the image of resilience, the memory of a woman who had been doubted, mocked, and underestimated, and who had answered without raising her voice. Her lessons outlived her presence. Recruits drilled with new discipline. When a man rushed his breathing, someone muttered, "Background. Pain is background. Noise is background." When a squad panicked in a drill, another whispered, "If you can't see what hunts you, you're already finished." Her words became rules etched deeper than the camp's manuals. And soon, those words left the camp. Units deployed across borders, sent to buffer zones and outposts. Men who had trained under her carried fragments of her voice into real fire. In frostbitten forests, one sniper steadied his scope and whispered her line to himself before pulling the trigger. In desert winds, a squad held their ground in silence, remembering how she had taught them that patience was the sharpest weapon. They did not call her name over radios, but in the quiet between fights, when they cleaned rifles or lit cigarettes with shaking hands, they spoke of her. Not the Phantom. Some swore she was still out there, a shadow attached to no unit, no flag, a silent figure stepping into battles no report would acknowledge. Others insisted she had disappeared back into Poland, into forests where snow covered her tracks. But even those who doubted could not ignore the weight her story carried. It gave them something to believe in. Because belief is its own kind of armor. But legends are dangerous too. They stretch until the truth inside them is hard to find. Some recruits began to believe she was invincible, more ghost than flesh. Others whispered that she had never bled, that the scar on her cheek was a trick of light. They forgot that she had stumbled, that she had risen with blood running, that she had finished not because she was untouchable, but because she refused to stop. And maybe that was the real heart of the legend. Not that she never broke, but that breaking never ended her. Winter fell hard that year. Frost thickened on the parade ground, boots crunching louder in silence. New drills were run, harder, colder, longer. Instructors found recruits holding themselves to impossible standards. Some broke under the weight, others thrived. And always the name hung in the air like fog. White Phantom. The major pretended to ignore it. In official reports, she was still advisor. But late at night, when the generator ticked and his tent walls flapped in the wind, he sometimes muttered the name under his breath. Not with reverence, not with fear, with something closer to resignation. Because he knew what the recruits didn't: myths cannot be controlled. The colonel in charge of training rotations wrote a line in his logbook that month. Discipline improved, precision improved, morale stabilized, cause, the phantom effect. He underlined the words twice, then closed the book with a sigh. The effect reached even those who had never seen her. Soldiers rotated in from other camps, men who had fought in deserts and mountains. They brought their own stories, their own scars, but even they asked, "Is she real, the Phantom?" And slowly the myth spread further than Black Ridge, beyond borders, beyond NATO circles, into the minds of enemies too. Intelligence reports mentioned a female sniper ghost operating in buffer zones, a woman who struck once and disappeared, her name never written, only the shadow. The irony was that herself had no part in it. She was gone, silent, unreachable. And maybe that was why the legend grew so easily. A presence that cannot be found, cannot be disproved. Weeks turned to months. The scarf she had left behind remained untouched on her bunk. No one dared move it. It became almost sacred, a reminder that she had once walked there. That silence could be stronger than orders. That dignity did not need to explain itself. On storm nights, when lightning cracked over the valley and rain hammered the barracks roofs, recruits lay awake staring at shadows. Some swore they felt her eyes on them. Others whispered they heard a single rifle crack, carried by thunder, even though no one had fired. Perhaps it was imagination. Perhaps it was memory bending again. But that is how ghosts are born, not from death, from absence. And mocked once for being a woman with a rifle case, was no longer just a person. She was an absence that haunted them all. A white phantom. Why did soldiers in other wars speak her name, even when they had never seen her? It began with fragments. A rumor passed in mess halls, a name scribbled in notebooks, a whisper on a patrol radio. Men who had once trained under her were scattered now, folded into other units, sent to other borders. They carried her with them the way soldiers always carry their ghosts. One sniper, dug into frost at the edge of a Baltic ridge, steadied his scope on a convoy and muttered her line under his breath. Pain is background. Noise is background. He squeezed the trigger, and when the shot landed clean, he smiled faintly, whispering phantom. A squad pinned in mountain passes remembered the hunt, 1 against 15, and when panic clawed at their throats, one of them hissed, "If you can't see what hunts you, you're already finished." The words calmed them, not because they belonged to doctrine, but because they belonged to her. They survived. The officers never recorded her name. Reports listed kills and engagements, but not the legend behind them. Still, the name moved, carried in silence. Soon it crossed borders no file could track. In dim barracks hundreds of miles away, men whispered over cigarettes. They say she moves with snow, that she can shoot once and end a war. Others shook their heads. No one like that exists, it's just myth. But their voices lowered anyway, as if afraid the myth itself might hear. Fear makes shadows longer. And in those shadows, enemies began to believe too. Contractors in conflict zones swapped stories at campfires. "There's a woman," one said, staring into the flames. "She doesn't miss, doesn't speak. You don't even hear her breathing. White scarf. They call her Phantom." Another spat into the dirt. "Nonsense." But he still checked the tree line twice before sleeping. The more the story spread, the less it belonged to. She had left Black Ridge with nothing but her rifle case and silence, yet now her absence filled more space than her presence ever had. Absence is powerful. The recruits at Black Ridge still trained under her shadow. Every mistake carried the thought, she would have seen me. She would have ended me. The scarf remained untouched, a relic of something they couldn't explain but couldn't let go of either. The major refused to speak her name aloud. In official papers, she was erased. No photographs, no records of her final departure. But in private, he sometimes stared at the empty bunk and wondered if he had ever truly known who she was. Because sometimes, when snow fell across the gravel, he felt it too, the weight of unseen eyes. Soldiers need myths. Myths keep them steady when maps turn meaningless and orders falter. Myths tell them they are not alone in the dark. But was no myth. She had been flesh, blood, scars, silence. She had felt cold water soak her bones, had felt mud grind into her cheek, had tasted iron from her own blood. She had endured not because she was invincible, but because she refused to yield. And yet, that truth was harder for men to believe than the legend of a ghost who never missed. So the myth grew larger than the woman. In conflict zones across Eastern Europe, whenever a sniper's bullet cut too clean, whispers began. Phantom. In the Caucasus, when a patrol vanished after one shot in the night, the name surfaced again. It was her. No proof, no, just the echo of fear. The myth had become untethered from reality. And maybe that was the only way she could survive. Because to be a phantom is to never be seen clearly, to be remembered not as who you are, but as what others need you to be. Some nights in bunkhouses heavy with exhaustion, recruits asked each other quietly, "Do you think she's proud of this, of being a ghost?" No one answered. Because how could anyone know? What does a phantom feel when dignity becomes story? Does she feel pride, or does she feel erased? The years moved, soldiers rotated, wars shifted, and still her story traveled. In Polish villages far from the front, elders muttered when snow fell heavy, "The forest has eyes again." In deserts where no snow had ever touched, foreign fighters still whispered the name like a curse. And at Black Ridge, new recruits stepped onto the gravel parade ground, already looking for her, already wondering if the white phantom was watching from the tree line. They didn't know she was gone. Or maybe she was. Some swore they saw her once, moving across ridges at dusk, scarf trailing faint in wind. Some insisted she had joined covert missions no file could confirm. Some believed she had simply disappeared into her homeland's forests, tired of men who spoke louder than they acted. The truth didn't matter anymore, because sometimes dignity doesn't need proof. It just acts. Why do legends feel heavier than truth? Because legends are chains. At Black Ridge, years after his departure, the camp still breathed under her shadow. New recruits stepped off trucks already searching the tree line, eyes squinting as though expecting her silhouette to emerge from the pines. They had never seen her, never heard her voice, yet they drilled as if she were watching. The instructors didn't correct them. In fact, they used it. Would the phantom have missed that shot? They asked. Would she have broken her silence with that chatter? The recruits fell in line. Fear disguised itself as discipline. But discipline born of ghosts is fragile. Because ghosts cannot correct you. They cannot tell you when enough is enough. Some recruits bent themselves to breaking, chasing an image that never truly existed. They spent nights prone in the frost, holding breath until lungs shook, because they believed she had once lain there longer. They crawled through mud until elbows bled, because they had heard she had vanished into earth itself. They did not train to be soldiers. They trained to be phantoms. And some succeeded, but not without scars. One recruit, thin and hollow-eyed, whispered to his bunkmate, "I dreamed she was here, standing over me, watching." His voice cracked. She didn't speak, she just shook her head. The boy didn't sleep after that. The major noticed the toll. He saw eyes too sunken, hands too steady for their age, silence that no laughter dared break. Sometimes he wanted to say her name, to remind them she had been flesh, that she had bled, that she had been mocked once too. But he stopped himself, because the myth was stronger now than the truth, and in war, strength is rarely questioned. But strength can also hollow. Far beyond Black Ridge, her name surfaced in darker places. In conflict zones, enemy contractors whispered warnings. "There's a woman in the woods. Don't linger near frost. Don't flash glass. If you hear nothing, you're already dead." Fear spread faster than bullets. Whole patrols hesitated to cross ridges because of a ghost they couldn't confirm. Intelligence analysts noted the hesitation in reports, never daring to write the name. Yet among allies, her legend inspired. Units cornered in mountain valleys steadied themselves by speaking her words. Noise is background. They drew courage not from medals or officers, but from a ghost who might not even be there. And maybe that was the part. Herself, wherever she was, had no say. She had become something she never asked to be, less a soldier, more a story. Somewhere, perhaps in a cabin in the forests of her homeland, maybe she sat alone cleaning her rifle, the white scarf folded across a chair. Maybe she heard the rumors carried back by men on leave. Maybe she wondered how her silence had grown so loud. Did she feel pride or weariness? Did she resent the way her humanity had been carved away until only a shadow remained? No one knew, because no one could find her. And that was how the myth survived, because absence cannot contradict belief. The recruits at Black Ridge began to test the story among themselves. Late at night, they dared each other to crawl into the tree line and lie in the frost. Some swore they felt watched. One insisted he heard a branch snap though the forest was still. Another returned pale, whispering, "She was there. I know she was." Of course, there was nothing. But the imagination of men in darkness is stronger than truth. And so the phantom became heavier. A burden on those who believed. A fear to those who doubted. A prison, perhaps, for the woman herself. The Major once walked the valley alone, long after midnight. Frost crackled beneath his boots, stars sharp above. He stopped at the ridge where she had once lain still for hours, where she had humiliated 15 men with patience and silence. He knelt, pressed his hand into the frozen ground, and whispered, "If you're still out there, what are you now, a person, or only the story we made you?" The wind answered, cold, empty. But as he walked back, he couldn't shake the feeling that his question had been heard. Time passed, and the White Phantom was no longer just a myth of one camp. She became a presence that haunted whole regions. Military journalists hinted at her in coded lines. Intelligence briefs described precision anomalies. Enemies wrote her name in curses on walls. But the woman herself remained unseen. And maybe that was the only way it could be. Because once a person becomes a legend, can they ever return to being flesh? The recruits never thought about that question. For them, she was proof that silence could be stronger than orders, that patience could be sharper than rage, that dignity didn't need applause. But if she was still alive, the legend might have felt different. Because to be remembered as a phantom is to lose something of yourself. To watch as your scars are erased, your humanity replaced with whispers. To know that the world no longer remembers who you were, only what you became for them. And yet, isn't that the fate of every soldier? To be remembered not for laughter or pain or loneliness, but for what others needed them to be in the story. Had once been mocked for being a woman with a rifle case. Now she was something else entirely. Not a soldier, not a teacher, not even a woman. She was the weight in silence, the eyes in frost, the White Phantom. Why do some stories never end, even when the person inside them is gone? Because absence is louder than presence. Years passed. Black Ridge rotated new faces, new recruits, new officers. Trucks rumbled in and out, carrying young men to frost and drills, sending others away to conflicts no one spoke of by name. The world shifted, borders blurred, wars sparked and faded, yet through it all her story remained. The scarf she left behind was never moved, not by orders, not by curiosity. Dust gathered on its folds, then frost, then sun again. Generations of recruits passed by it in silence. Some touched it lightly as though it might burn them. Others avoided it entirely, afraid of tempting whatever presence lingered. And always the name endured. The White Phantom. At first it was whispered with awe, then with fear, later with reverence, as if speaking it too loudly would conjure her back from the trees. Even men who never believed in ghosts hesitated before saying it, because belief once seated does not need truth to grow. Reports from distant valleys kept feeding the fire. A patrol wiped out by a single unseen shot. A convoy halted by a bullet that cut an engine block clean. A sniper team that swore they were being watched for days, only to find nothing but a white scrap of cloth caught on a branch. Some believed it was her. Others dismissed it as coincidence or copycats, but it didn't matter. Each story pulled her further into myth. The officers who had once known her stopped trying to explain. The Major, now grayer, sat in his tent one winter night staring at the empty bunk across from him. He whispered, not for the first time, "You were never meant to be this." His words evaporated into the dark. But myths do not care what we intend. They live as long as someone needs them. And men in war always need them. In other camps, recruits told versions of her story that bent further from the truth. Some said her rifle was pure white, invisible in snow. Others claimed she had no heartbeat, that machines could not track her because she did not breathe like normal soldiers. One insisted she could shoot the wings off a bird in flight without breaking stride. The lies didn't weaken the legend, they fed it. Because the phantom was no longer, she was something else. A mirror for whatever soldiers wanted to believe. To some, she was invincible courage. To others, she was silent terror. To a few, she was the reminder that one person could stand unbroken against many. But who was she truly now? Some swore they had glimpsed her years later, a figure at the edge of a scarf fluttering, a woman moving through fog, rifle balanced, eyes fixed forward, each sighting blurred into the next until no one could tell truth from memory. Perhaps she was alive, perhaps not. But in the end, it didn't matter. Because the white phantom was larger than life, and larger than death. And maybe that was the quiet tragedy. Had once been mocked for walking into camp with a rifle case. She had once been doubted, dismissed, ignored. She had once been nothing more than a woman standing against laughter. Now she was no longer allowed to be human at all. Her silence had become myth. Her scars had become whispers. Her endurance had become a ghost story men told each other to survive the night. But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. Not every soldier is remembered by name. Not every sacrifice is carved in stone. Some survive only in the way they made others feel. Some live on not in medals or files, but in the shiver of recruits crawling through frost, in the steadiness of hands that whisper her words before a shot. Pain is background, noise is background. If you cannot see what hunts you, you are already finished. Her voice lingered where her body did not. And in that way, she was not gone at all. One winter storm, long after she had vanished, the recruits huddled in barracks while snow battered the valley. The wind howled against shutters. Lights flickered. And still, some swore they felt eyes on them. One boy, barely 18, whispered, "Do you think she's still out there?" Another, older now, shook his head slowly. "Doesn't matter." The boy frowned. "Why not?" The older one looked at the frost on the window pane, the reflection of his own tired eyes. "Because she's here, even if she never was again." Silence followed, a silence not of fear this time, but of recognition. They understood. She did not need to return for the myth to endure. She did not need to breathe for her presence to guide them. She had become what few ever do, not just a soldier but a story. And stories outlast even ghosts. In time, when new wars came and old ones ended, when files were archived and names forgotten, the legend still lingered. Soldiers in cold forests and hot deserts still whispered her name. Civilians in distant villages still told children that the trees carried eyes. And in some quiet place, perhaps deep in the pines of her homeland, maybe she stood once more, rifle slung, scarf trailing, watching, not as a ghost, not as a myth, but as herself. Silent, patient, enduring. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.